Russia's summer offensive has failed, so the Russians now try to start moving the front line again in earnest with mechanized attacks. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this SITREP about the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians have struck the Volgograd refinery, while at the same time in Ukraine gasoline is getting cheaper. This during times when in Russia, in some oblasts, there is shortage of gasoline and the price is going up. The Russians struck a dormitory of a school in Kharkiv with an FPV drone, and they also published a video of striking a United Nations convoy, which they themselves published, clearly showing that the trucks were visible as United Nations vehicles. We'll switch to the developments along the front line, and here the Ukrainians have entered the town of Oleksivka in Sumy. We talked about it a couple of SITREPs ago that the Ukrainians were close to Oleksivka. Now they are in the center of the town. It's probably too early to claim that Oleksivka was recaptured by the Ukrainians, but the majority of the town should be considered contested. Inside of the gray zone now, the Russians are definitely being pushed back. That's it from Sumy. We switch to Kharkiv, and here there is report by an open source analyst that the Russians are redeploying forces from basically the Vovchansk area here into the area of Milove. This is an indication of the Russians changing their priorities inside of Kharkiv, as they cannot advance in any serious way inside of Vovchansk in the area there. So they will likely refocus to help with the advance towards Kupiansk in this direction. But this so far has not led to any changes along the front line. On the Eastern Front, we do not have any changes either over the past days. The Ukrainians have ordered mandatory evacuation of 40 villages around Kupiansk because of the Russian threat there, but that's all we have to report north of the Seversky Donetsk. South of the river Seversky Donetsk, here in the Seversk direction, once again, I cannot confirm any change in territory. In Kostiantynivka, we have the Ukrainians operating inside of Pleshivka, being freshly geolocated, that the Ukrainians are here in the south of Pleshivka. This confirms that the Ukrainians still hold a presence here despite the Russian advances recently in this direction. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians have attacked Shakhove with a mechanized assault and reached into a closer proximity of it. We see that they managed to advance at least until in this direction. According to Konstantin Mashovets, the Russians have now also taken Doroshnie. We have that here. Konstantin Mashovets is a former colonel of the Ukrainian armed forces. He confirms that the Russians have taken Dorozhny, so usually he has proven to be accurate in the past. And of course, it's a pro-Ukrainian voice admitting defeat in Dorozhny, a well-informed Ukrainian voice, so we would assume that this is correct. He also said that the Russians are still along the railroad line north of Rodynske, still holding positions there. This would be this area here. So while the deep state map considers it to be liberated by the Ukrainians, according to Konstantin Mashovets, this is at least not fully correct. This was it from Pokrovsk. In the Meshova direction, we have the Russians advancing a little bit towards this direction here. We have a fresh advance at this point. As you can see, the Russians have reached the oblast border towards Dnipro at this point. Not a major advance, but an advance nonetheless. And in the Pokrovsk direction, we have the Russians advancing into Iskra. We have that here. Pokrovske. Not Pokrovsk. Pokrovsk, we have the Russian attack on a Russian soldier on the west side of Iskra. This is unclear what that means. This clearly means that parts of Iskra must be considered to be in the gray zone, but this does not mean that the Russians have taken the town, as we talked a lot about in the past SITREPs, that by now most of the attacks are done by single soldiers, sometimes two, deeply infiltrating, so this might very well be hundreds of meters, if not several kilometers behind the forward Ukrainian positions. It in itself does not prove too much, except that the Russian soldiers have re-entered Iskra. The Russians have also been spotted south of that, southwest of it, in Oleksivka, as we can see here. We have the Russians in various parts of Oleksivka, basically in the northern part. This is too early to conclude that Oleksivka has fallen completely to the Russians, but it's definitely a possibility now, even though we do not have confirmed fresh presence in the southern part of the town. In the direction of Huliapole, the Russians have advanced towards the town of Novomykolaivka. This is here. We see fresh Russian presence on the eastern part of Novomykolaivka. This is confirmed by the deep step map also. The Russians are advancing in this direction as well. Recently, the Russians had some successes in this direction. In the Zaporizhzhia region, we have several new changes that are being reported. First of all, the Ukrainians themselves report that they did not just liberate Malish-Cherbaky, but also Shcherbaky and parts of Stepove. So Malish-Cherbaky was reported to be liberated by the Ukrainians in the last SITREP. We have that here. Now the claim is that Shcherbaky is also liberated and parts of Stepove. Now, as you can see, we have I say that there are claims, reports. I have yet to see a geolocation that confirms it being fully liberated. Interesting, though, is what we have here. This is a video of Ukrainian attacks, and it shows clearly the Ukrainians using ATVs here. So this is being used by the Ukrainians for offensive operations as well. And as we can see, while the Russians attack in small units, the Ukrainians use bigger forces when they attack, and according to the claims, this was successful. As we can see here, the area around it is blurred, and I have yet to see a geolocation, so it's still a possibility that Malish-Cherbaky, Shcherbaky and parts of Stepove have actually not been liberated. Towards the west of that, we have a geolocation from the south of Stepanohirsk. Here, Ukrainian forces fought with Russian soldiers and defeated them. They defeated them inside of the high-rises here, which would first of all, show that Russian soldiers are operating inside of this, but also that, at least in some parts of the area, they were defeated. So likely this is not under solid Ukrainian control, but has to be considered more a contested area. That was it with the territorial changes along the front line. Russia has by now started mechanized attacks again. Within the last week, 3 mechanized attacks have happened, all of them in the Pokrovsk direction, all of them from company to even battalion size. In Pankivka, towards Pankivka, the Russians attacked on the 6th of October, towards Shachove on the 9th of October, and in the Dobropilia direction, probably again into the direction of Shachove on the 13th of October. The Ukrainians reported that those attacks were not successful and suffered heavy losses, even though so far we do not have final geolocation proof. We know that Russian heavy equipment was lost on the way to, or destroyed on the way to, those 3 towns, but whether or not the disembarked infantry managed to gain a foothold is obviously a totally different question. So whether the attacks were a complete failure in regards to not even gain territory or not is too early to say, at least with the evidence that I have in front of me. The interesting part is, next to mechanized equipment, the Russians also used a lot of motorcycles, and all of the attacks happened during bad weather, either rain or fog. So the Russians are clearly trying to use bad weather when the Ukrainian drones have less efficiency to advance again with mechanized equipment. Still, though, we have to come to the conclusion that the summer offensive that the Russians did was a failure. We have the comparison here between the May 1st and the today's date. So we see that there was a change in territory, and at some times 20 kilometers, but while the Russians managed to gain tactical advances, even though they even managed to gain a tactical breakthrough close to Dobropilia. We're talking about this area up here. Even though they managed to have successes there, they have not been able to exploit these advances. They have not managed to achieve an operational breakthrough. They did not achieve any of their operational goals. Kostiantynivka is still under Ukrainian control. Mirnograd and Pokrovsk is still under Ukrainian control as well. So while the main focus of the Russians were on the Donbas, and while they no doubt have gained some territory, as we can see, for a half a year of advances, the best they could get is like 20 to 25 kilometers while suffering horrendous losses. The autumn and winter offensive that is currently in the process can obviously lead to more successes. It is likely that the Russians are going to use more mechanized equipment then, which might lead them to some successes. But so far, we do not see any significant successes of the Russians that they have achieved in these past days. Kupiansk is a little bit different, but also here not a major difference. This is Kupiansk on May the 1st, and this is it today. So we see that the Russians managed to gain some territory here, and they managed to enter Kupiansk. This is some success, as they managed to cut the line of communication through Kupiansk into the bridgehead on the eastern side of the Oskil River. But overall, close to Kupiansk, Vuzlovi, which is here in the center, the supply is likely still crossing over the river, and thus the Ukrainians are still able to resupply their units here. This is clearly done, though, under FPV threat, as it's only 5 to 6 kilometers away from the Russian positions here, but at the same time, this hasn't changed much from before. The bridge, the crossing over the Oskil River was in range of FPV drones before as well. So overall, there is no significant change that the Russians have achieved during the last 5 months of fighting. In regards to the hybrid warfare, the Polish government is saying Russia is paying with crypto for sabotage operations to hide the origin, and at times they're using saboteurs of convenience, basically someone being hired online, being paid crypto to then do some sabotage. This allows them to keep some distance and obviously continue their hybrid war without doing it officially with governmental means. In troop generation, Russia is preparing now to change the law to use reservists. This could allow for a usage inside of Ukraine, but we'll talk about this more in depth and the challenges the Russians are facing in their manpower in the future. From the Ukrainian side, we have generational strength, troop generation as well. News in this regard. Wild Hornets are reporting 900 intercepted drones now with the Sting interceptor drone. That's a drone that it was developed by the Ukrainians to fight Shahid drones, and it is capable of vertical launch and fast enough to hit Shahid drones, and thus can be used all over the country, and thus has turned out to be a fairly effective means. Also, the Ukrainians are increasing their usage of UGVs. We see one here where the Ukrainian soldiers put a wounded comrade into a UGV, which is then being shelled with artillery and still manage to get away with the wounded person in it. Obviously, that can make all the difference with the Ukrainians possibly being able to evacuate critically injured personnel without putting the personnel to evacuate it under danger. This can save lives and can help the Ukrainian armed forces retain its manpower, and also obviously allow Ukrainian heavily wounded personnel to see its family again. In the political sphere, we have news from Russia's coal industry, and it's a disaster. It's in a heavy crisis. The deficit is rapidly growing. In the first 7 months of 2025, the Russians had twice as high losses in the coal industry than all of 2024 together. It's a problem for Russia, as while coal is not the biggest part of its export, it is an important employer. In some regions, it's the most important one. In total, more than 140,000 Russians are working in this field. 23 coal companies have already gone down. 13% of all companies, another 53 are being threatened by this. This is due to Chinese increased production, dropping the prices, and Russia had to give up to 60% in discount after the beginning of the full-scale invasion. invasion, so Asian customers continue buying Russian coal. Now the discount is only down to 20%, but that still means that the Russians are losing money with every ton of coal they're actually selling. And another problem is that the railway transport, and coal is being transported by railway in Russia, this has increased in price significantly. One of the reasons for that is that oil is now being transported a lot on railway. With the fuel cars, the Russians can export oil to nations where they don't have a pipeline connection. And as their pipelines are no longer used to the full extent because of the war in Ukraine, Russia still wants to export the oil, and now those trains are competing with the coal. This has meant that for the Russians, the price of transport actually has increased from 50 to 90% of the overall cost of coal being mined inside of Russia, and that clearly shows that for the Russians, the coal industry is in a heavy crisis. The Russians are also saying that they would love to peacefully find a solution for the war in Ukraine, but they still lack the alternatives. Basically, once again, on one hand, telling the Americans, hey, we would love to negotiate, but at the same time, emphasizing that negotiations are currently pointless because the Ukrainians do not want to be a puppet state of Russia. Zelensky has ousted the mayor of Odessa because, according to the Ukrainian intelligence agency SBU, he's having the Russian passport since 2014. Zelensky has thus taken away his citizenship on this basis, and he has to be a citizen to be the mayor of of Odessa. The person himself, Hennady Trukhanov, is denying the allegations. He's saying that's wrong, and after Odessa has been put under military administration, there are claims inside of Ukraine that Zelensky tries to centralize power. So basically that he's abusing his power here in regards to a potential opposition figure towards him. This is obviously, while this is an interesting topic, at the same time, we have to acknowledge that this discussion is possible inside of Ukraine. There are protests about this right now. And as we've seen in the past with the changes in the corruption laws, protests can lead to some successes. Obviously, the current government is not immune to making mistakes, and the Ukrainian public can still have a voice about this and can still protest. In international support, Finland has now joined the initiative to buy US weapons for Ukraine. But while that is good news, at the same time, the calculation for next year are that Ukraine will need between 12 and 20 billion to fulfill its need. So 12 to 20 billion of money to buy weapons from the United States, while at the same time, so far in 2024, only 2 billion were found among its supporters. And that was it for today's SITREP. If you like this, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description, but that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.